Okay, so sitting here with Jesse at Conduit Coffee at the Conduit Coffee Studio. Actually, I was thinking about that on the way, how you call it a studio, which is pretty awesome because, there's a lot of art and craft.
Right. Yeah,
coffee.
We like calling it the studio, partly because it's artsy and it's hipster. It makes sense. We do a lot of networking and it's a space. It's really just like kind of an active space that's centered around our little coffee business, but it's
very
a studio.
Yeah. And you've had parties here, and you have people visit, and you have your Tuesday open house.
Yeah, we do the open houses, and the parties, of course, are a lot of fun. But what's really cool is we're also supporting a couple nonprofits by providing space for them to have meetings here as well. So we can kind of cater that, and it's a nice sort of professional place where they can come and they have a table, and we can bring food and have all the facilities here for that. So it's really fun to bring in other ideas and other good people that aren't necessarily related to the coffee world that come and appreciate what we're doing here.
I like that. Before we get into talking about the nonprofits, because I didn't think about that, but that's very cool. We're sitting here with Jesse's brewed a Chemex of something. What am I drinking? Because I don't know what this is.
Let me taste it first, and I'll tell you. This is wonderful. This is a pea berry from Hawaii, from the Ninole region near Kona. It's a direct trade. It's actually a family friend that retired and bought a farm in Hawaii, and it might be the last of it. He may be selling it. I think they had some health issues this year.
Oh, okay.
But it's nice. It's a really nice coffee, and it's been fun to watch him grow. They got a new mill, and you could see instantly the quality of the coffee beans went up. There was less broken beans and less mucilage dried on it and stuff like that. So as their business grew, it was fun to see that over the course of the last year. It's like Hawaiian coffee. It's really nice and smooth. It's not particularly remarkable, but it's really... I shouldn't say that on recording. David, this is the best coffee I've ever had. I love you. Thank you.
It is delicious. My initial impressions. It doesn't. I've been drinking a lot of coffee lately that has really outstanding, fascinating notes to it.
Right.
The other day I went to Ballard Coffee Works because they do siphon there. Yeah. And I wanted to try siphon, and I had a siphon of some Ethiopian coffee that had notes of blueberry to it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And it tasted like I was walking through a field of blueberries. Which was...
It's amazing.
Remarkable.
Right. Yeah, when you can taste that landscape and it instantly gets that image in your head of where this was grown. Coffee like this, so I think, it's something that Americans are generally used to, is the kind of smooth, full-bodied coffee. And that's why Hawaiian coffee has really captured that marketing. It's interesting because it's grown at 1,200 feet, versus 1,200 meters or more. So it's really low altitude, and they have just an ongoing growing season there. With the weather patterns that move in and move out, move in and move out on a very consistent basis. So the beans are big. Even these pea berries are bigger than a lot of the other beans I get.
Is that due to the altitude, or?
I think, and I'd love to dive into this more with the biologist, but I think what it is just that they grow easier, and so the beans get larger because there's just more availability of sunlight and moisture and things like that versus the real tiny beans from Peru or the high altitude areas that are small because they have to struggle that much more to get that fruit.
That makes sense.
And that's also why you tend to get much more bright and fruity coffees from higher altitudes because there's that much more packed in there and that much more effort. Just like wine grapes, you don't want wine grapes to just grow and grow and grow and get big and juicy. You want them to be dense and sweet. So it's the same concept.
It's interesting points. I never thought about that. So, Jesse.
Yes.
Conduit Coffee. What brought you here? Perhaps a short 2-minute version of who you are and what brought you here and why Conduit.
Conduit's been a name I've used as kind of an internet handle for a while in various forms, and it's something a role I sort of took upon myself when I was working in undergrad, really working with politics and doing that stuff was just kind of a conduit for information. I had a website called Politiconduit, which was just like a drudge report, just a filter for news that I found interesting and relevant, and I'd put it in certain orders and then just send it out. And it wasn't like I was really producing my own news, but it was a conduit for information to people. And so that's kind of where it took off. And then I was working with agriculture in Washington State, doing sustainable development and alternative energy in agriculture communities. And started roasting coffee. And the agriculture side of coffee and the agriculture side of fine organic vegetables in Yakima Valley are very similar in a lot of ways. A lot of the same challenges and marketing and pressures from agribusiness, and so they really went hand in hand. And then I burned out on politics. It was really frustrating to try and see these beautiful people and these farms and all these great ideas that just weren't getting funded by the government or getting looked over by banks because they weren't sexy enough with multi-million dollars and things like that.
Right.
We're looking for $10,000 to help a family buy a small piece of land and some farming tools, and that just doesn't sell the banks. So then I took off. I went to Europe and farmed in Sicily and just really went on sort of a coffee tour and decided after a few months that I just was going to try out roasting more professionally. And came back and backpacked around in Colorado for a while and decided that I better get back to work. I'd taken about 2 years off from the world and sort of had a vision and a goal, at least to experiment with it. And suddenly then I had investment money, some seed money, and found this space. When I got the checks in the mail, I found this space here. Really, really lucked out on it. And, kept the roaster small and the space small and everything, because it still is, but especially at that point, it was very much an experiment. Mm-hmm. I had done some work with roasters in Colorado, helping them bag and stuff like that, all the tedious parts of the coffee roasting. Beautiful coffee is easy to do. It's the bagging and cleaning and the sales and the marketing that's the struggle.
Business of the business.
Yes, exactly, the business. So that's definitely been the hardest part, but it was an experiment. So I bought the small roaster and just did everything ourselves. As much work as we could by ourselves, and here we are. So, and then the name Conduit was just part of that goal of just sharing what we know and what we don't know about coffee and food, and also knowing that coffee's a catalyst for sitting around and talking and stimulating the mind, and pretty much everybody
sitting next to this nice little sign here that says "Be a conduit." I like that.
And that's all what we want people to be, is just share what you love and share what you don't love, and the more that we communicate and bring stuff to the table, per se, that the better the world will be and the more interactive we can be. So that was part of the name, and yeah.
I was curious because I noticed on your bags, on the bags that you sell the coffee in, you have roasted kindly.
Yes.
And that, I think, is a pretty neat touch. It says a lot to me, but I'm curious what brought you to.
I'm not quite sure. We had a lot of funny little things, and we still put some funny little Cracker Jack surprises on some of the bags. I had a stamp at one point. It just said "roasted kindly" with the date, and people loved it. And so then when we got the bags printed, we put it on there in a more profound place. But really, it's just kindness. Just appreciation for where the coffee's coming from and who's drinking it and everything in between. So having saying that we're roasting it kindly, I think, just touches that. It's definitely, I guess it's a marketing technique where it just kind of touches on people, letting them know that we're putting care into this, and that we notice, every single batch and everything. We're very, very hands-on. And so that's, you don't make nice anything if you're angry. If you're roasting madly.
Roasting madly, That's a very different kind of coffee, I think.
Aggravated blend. Switching to decaf.
So the studio, pretty small space. Could you, so in a previous issue, March, I think, we had chatted, and before this time, I honestly knew nothing about roasting. And I have a little bit better idea. But could you walk us through, roasting, and I guess because your space is so small and your roaster is so small, I feel like you have that brings out a very specific.
I think it does. It might be the mud that's seeping through the walls. The room, we started off just in that little room there, 284 square feet, small. it's all part of one organ, you know. So when that fan kicks on in that roaster at 350 cubic feet per minute, you know, where's that air going to come from? And so we have to have we have another equivalent fan coming through from the hillside and the roof, and the hillside is this big, you know, jungle, unincorporated jungle up there on the hillside, and so all that air, you know, is coming from the roof and it's coming from the trees, and so every little weather pattern and humidity change and things like that all end up back in this room. We have a dehumidifier, and we try and keep the humidity consistent, I believe is the most important, but, you know, the temperature changes and stuff. So from the moment I walk in, you know, I walked in this morning, it was 68 degrees in that room. You know, it's just this habit of going in. It's like, all right, well, this is what the beans are basically going to do because the temperatures and the humidities are at certain points. Humidities. You know, so that's all part of the roasting game. Keep stuff really clean, as clean as we can. So there's always wiping down the buckets and sweeping and all that stuff, and then weighing out the coffee, and then into the roaster. You know, and it takes a while to get that all warmed up. You want to know about like the roasting, physical process?
Like the roasting, yeah, just like kind of an overview of the whole roasting process. I mean, I see bags of grain coffee there. Right. And then you got buckets of roasted coffee. I
really, for anybody that's listening, I really recommend, there's some awesome videos on YouTube. I'm not going to remember it now, of course, but there's a video of one bean being roasted over a Bunsen burner and talk about the physical changes that bean's going through real close in the camera. Mm-hmm. But, so essentially you put the green beans in, you know, when they're at the room temperature, and they go in the hopper and then into the hot drum. We use a drum roaster. We use a Diedrich IR5, so it's a infrared heat drum roaster. So that's going, and that's hot. You put the beans in. What's really cool about roasting is that there's very distinct stages of the roast that follow very, very specific changes in like the physical reactions of what's going on with the water, you know, the moisture content, and then the acids and the fats and everything that are in the beans. That, mm-hmm. You know, all those change, and all those have very scientific, you know, base points where those changes start to take place. So when you see these changes, you know that this is what's happening in the bean, and so you can really gauge it. And that's why sight and smell are so important with roasting. When watching it and paying attention, it's not just a clock and a timer and just set it to go. And that's one reason why we have a fully manual roaster, just so it's very hands-on. It's also a lot cheaper than buying the whole computer package that goes with it, you know. But there's a lot of consistency that can come from a computer control, but it also takes away that element of intrigue and trying to figure out what's going on and learning as we go. Every time I roast, I learn something new. It seems like. So there's two coffee. They call them cracks, and there's two cracks when you're roasting coffee, and essentially. The first crack is an endothermic reaction where the waters are finally, it's like popcorn popping, where the water vapors are finally, you know, expressed from the beans, and that's at that point where coffee basically becomes edible. It's where you can start grinding it, and when they go from the green and the yellow stages and the cinnamon, and they hit crack, and that's when you know the coffee is going to be edible. And so then when you have really light roasted coffees, they're cut off pretty much at first crack or during it. And then from there, it gets darker and darker. And then when you get up, you know, a couple minutes later, you hit the second crack, which is an exothermic reaction. And that's actually it's the creation of new oils and new acids that are being created in the roasting process. So it's from the heat combination. The heat is, you know, combining all these elements in there. And essentially, it's creating its own reaction. At that point, after that is generally considered a dark roast. You keep going, and those oils that were created in that reaction then start coming out, and then you get the French roast and the real oily beans. Mm-hmm. That's you know, and that's also where fires start, because that exothermic reaction, if you have too big of a batch, or the power goes out, or something like that, or you're careless, that's a lot of heat in an exothermic reaction that you can't stop. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, and you can't open up the roaster, you can't stop the drum, because that's just going to create more of that reaction. So there's a lot of roaster fires that come from that.
So you mentioned dark roast and French roast, and I think there's a couple different understandings of what that is. I guess to clarify, how does your coffee and your like scale of light to dark roasting compared to say Starbucks, for example?
Starbucks isn't really a fair example, fair comparison. Starbucks, it's economics when you get to roasting in that kind of volume.
Uh-huh.
You know, when you're talking about, well, let me first explain. Our roast, I try and do sort of a well-developed light roast. You know, they're often right after first crack, but I give it some time to sit there and play, depending on the coffee, of course, but sit there and play and let the sugar sort of develop, because at that first crack is the caramelization stage, where the sugars are actually starting to caramelize, and that's when you start getting that sweetness in a cup. It also is where the acids start toning down a little bit. And so for espressos and things like that, you want to get a little bit deeper into that roast so that they're not quite as bright, theoretically. You know, but everybody's doing something different now as far as what they want. So, you know, we take a long time. I usually hit first crack around, you know, about 9 minutes in, and then I cut the roast usually between the earliest would be like 11 minutes and 45 seconds. That's a really quick light roast for us. And then, you know, I go as long as you know, sometimes 16 minutes on our darker roasts that are in the middle of second crack when I cut them out.
Oh, okay.
So we don't even go as dark as a French roast with our dark beans, but we take a long time to get there, and it's very Italian, particularly northern Italian style of just letting it just slowly sort of evaporate. You're not doing a lot of harsh curves or anything with the beans.
I'm interrupting you. No, but I was going to ask, which coffees do you have that you roast darkly, like past second crack, as you mentioned?
Our studio style blend is the one that we do. I do some other custom roasts for friends that want that sort of darker Italian style roast. But really, personally, I enjoy the flavors that are more natural in the coffee. But there is some really cool sweetness that you can play with right at that edge of getting roasted. So with Starbucks, you know, they're almost 300 million pounds a year. Tremendous. I mean, it's unfathomable amount of coffee that we drink and that one company could produce. And so they have these roasters. You know, when you're looking at the difference between 6 minutes or 15 minutes on a roast, you're looking at the difference of twice as many BTUs, twice as many labor hours, you know, twice as much time and energy and money that has to go into that same product. And so if you take your beans and you roast them quickly, you know, and efficiently, then you get a more, you know, consistent product. That's one thing. You get a very consistent product, but you also save a lot of time and money when you're talking that kind of volume. So if Starbucks were to do what we're doing here, I mean, it would be a tremendous amount of labor costs and stuff like that. And so their roast curve is actually like just a ski slope. I mean, it's just like get as much heat in there kind of as quickly as possible. And I believe the roasts are about 9 minutes, you know, to get to that dark.
Wow.
So it's literally almost twice as fast.
Same amount of time, but far more roasted than what you're basically.
Yeah, so they're hitting first crack about 6 minutes in.
Okay.
So it's a big difference. You know, and sometimes about going darker, I think a lot of the history of that has just been that the coffee itself hasn't been, the green coffee from the farms hasn't been that quality. And why put the effort in to bring out the nuanced notes of, you know, whatever farm they're from, if they're not tasty? You know, you're much better off just taking the natural sugars and getting up to that caramelization and burning them a little bit, because then it's a consistent product and it's cheaper.
So speaking of the green coffee, where do you get yours?
I work very closely with an importer, some friends of mine. They're absolutely wonderful to me, but we get coffee from all over. You know, there's certain areas that I'm not a huge fan personally, and so it's sort of, you know, I have to eat it a little bit and get coffee that I don't necessarily enjoy too much, or roast that I don't think I'll enjoy, but then I get surprised. So we have some new Sumatrans, speaking of coffees that I don't ordinarily enjoy, some good kind of musky island coffee. But it's such an important piece of a dark roast that a lot of people are expecting. So I've been kind of on a search. I haven't found any Sumatrans lately that have really impressed me, except for Mark's over at Kuma. So I'm really excited. We're going to get some of those in a couple weeks here. But all over, I mean, Africa, we've had Ethiopian, Kenyan, Rwandan coffees. Part of our espresso blend is a Rwandan. Central and South American coffees. We have a new Mexican coffee and a couple Guatemalans coming in. Let's see, we have 2 El Salvadors and 2 Nicaraguans right now, and Bolivian.
How closely do you work with the farms? Because I noticed you have stories of the farms over here for some of your coffee, but you work with the importer.
I work with the importer who works very closely with the farmers. The direct trade it's an area that, well, as a traveler, it fascinates me. I'd absolutely love for the business to get to the point where I can travel to go to these places. We certainly can't afford it as a business right now, and there's nobody else that's roasting. So I can't go off and try and meet these farmers. And I think it's really important, and the stories are being told, and people are recognizing that, which is great. Olympia and Stumptown, these companies are doing an excellent job bringing those stories there. And it's just as important for me to share their story as it is for me to create my own story about those farmers, and trusting my importer that is doing good work with these farmers. I know a little bit of the story, but I don't think that the direct trade is particularly important as an activity for a roasting company to do. I mean, telling the story is certainly important, but actually meeting the farmers and bringing that in it's a marketing thing in a lot of ways. On the other hand, if you have money like Stumptown, going down there and building schools and replacing bridges and all that stuff is absolutely wonderful. And that's so much more than just knowing the farmer and buying coffee from. That's actually, a two-way learning experience and, training people and, it's very much of a cooperative thing. It's much more than just trading with them for coffee. It's, so I think Stumptown sort of coined the phrase direct trade. I think it's so much more than just a direct trade. I mean, what they're doing is beautiful. I mean, it's micro lending and development work is really what it is for coffee communities. So, I mean, that's probably the direction that I would like to go. Just to go hang out in Guatemala for a couple months and go to school sounds wonderful.
That does sound pretty awesome.
So we get our coffees from all over. I said that swine is direct trade, and that's sort of that's fortunate. And we know the farmer. I do know the farmer for one of our Guatemalans just from the coffee industry. He's worked with the importer long enough, and now his coffee, he and his brother have a farm in Guatemala, and their coffee's nice enough that they're selling it as a single origin. Mm-hmm. And so I've known him just because he's been to Seattle a few times. And that's a cool relationship. And we're friends on Facebook, and his daughter's one of the daughters her soccer team won the Central American Youth Cup. Huh. So it's fun, like knowing that stuff about him when it's totally irrelevant to the coffee, but it's also a resource I can go and it's like, what's going on with the rust in Guatemala, and he sent back this articulate, heartbreaking story of him and his neighbors and what's going on with the rust. And
is that affecting you?
It will. Oh, we're looking at a 40% cut in all Central American coffees next year, across the board, everybody. My importer, I can't really quote her because there's a lot of swear words. But I asked her, I was like, well, what's going on with the rust? And she said, F you for asking. What do you want me to tell you? You're not going to have any Central American coffees next year? And that was it. And it's, and it's scary, and they're panicking, and they definitely specialize in Central and South American coffees too, just because of their own business design. Mm-hmm. But I mean, that's a really frightening thing for the whole coffee world, and nobody really knows what's going to happen. So prices, I wouldn't be surprised if prices double in some ways next year.
I personally have been on an Ethiopian kick lately, so
I love Ethiopian coffees. I mean, we've talked about this before, but the bright fruity coffee is absolutely fascinating to me. The first time I had a cup of coffee that I roasted myself as a home roaster, I was like, that's blueberries and cream. This is amazing, and it's just the excitement that comes from that is much more like, I get more excited about that than like this Hawaiian in a way, even though this is delicious in its own way. But
there's some interesting videos and articles on the origin of coffee and how, on varietals and how, Ethiopia being the origin of coffee has thousands of different varietals, but how I guess most of the rest of the coffee in the world essentially originated from one plant. Although there's been changes over the years.
Right. Lots. Coffee is fairly easy to hybridize it, if that's a word. In Ethiopia, I believe it's like 12,000 known species of coffee that they've found in Ethiopia. And really we use about 32 different species for commercial production in the world. And most of that's really like the top 6. And a lot of that's just because of how much coffee they grow per plant, how big the plants are, how easy they are to harvest, and where they grow best. So there's hybrids now that they're creating that grow really well in certain conditions, and that's interesting how that's happening. We've been able to create these new species.
Getting back to the roasting aspect of things, we kind of went off on a a little farming tangent, but it's all fascinating. You have a Bolivia coffee. This Bolivian roast I had a couple months ago. Fantastic. But then I guess you made some changes, or was it changes on your end, or did you get a different
Nope. It's the same. Actually, it's the same bag. Literally the same bag of coffee, I believe.
But it tasted so different.
Yeah, I don't know if lay people could really notice the difference tremendously. Maybe if you put them side by side. That's what's fun about my little shop is it doesn't matter if they notice or not, because that's all part of the story that we're telling. Is like things aren't the same. The weather's different, things like that. I had an epiphany actually. Like I said, I learn stuff every single time I roast, and I was reading up on. I kind of had some ideas about airflow and changing up the airflow, and so I started researching some of that, and a lot of times these things strike me as a new metaphor, like a new language that I'm hearing, new words to describe what's going on. It was just like, oh my gosh, this is what I should do on some of these coffees. Like this is a way to bring out some of those fruitier, or the acids, that make those lighter notes. And so I adjusted the profile, and the Bolivia is fun because it's a really nice sweet coffee, but it has some really nice fruit notes in it too, so it's flexible in that way. It's pretty good as a darker roast as well. I almost reversed the curve. I put a lot more heat earlier in it and less at the end, and adjusted the airflow, and it was beautiful. The first roast I did, I could smell the difference when it came out, and that I did four different roasts. That day, I got into it a little bit. Did 4 different roasts of that Bolivian coffee and put them all side by side, and you could definitely taste the difference, which is fascinating. That just it's literally like 2 degrees and 10 seconds different. Just where that heat is entering and where the airflow is entering makes all that difference of how the heat transfers into it and when. So during the Maillard reaction, when the proteins and acids are doing their thing before first crack. Changing how that heat gets in there makes a huge difference at the end, So if you can kind of get that heat in there and get it locked in there, and then end the roast quickly, then you've created a nice bright coffee. Whereas if you let it kind of dry out and go long, then you get a nice kind of it flattens it basically, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But
it's really fascinating this sort of combination of art and science. Really, yeah.
Yeah. I call it superstition, and I get a lot of criticism for using that word so much, and including last night. There's so much science that goes into this, and so many known scientific properties of the physics of heat transfer and the chemistry of things changing with heat, and all that stuff is very well known. But what isn't known, but there's a lot of rules of thumb for it, or when that happens and what the telltale signs are. And then when you get to a room like this with the humidity and the temperature changes and stuff like that, there's so many variables that could possibly go into that roast that yes, that this reaction is going to happen at this degree, but that degree might be 25 seconds later, or
right.
There's so many variables that go into it that a lot of what we perceive and enjoy about coffee is actually just this is all my personal opinion. It's all superstition that they either make a big difference or they don't, or that people are going to notice it. So when you make when I buy the green coffee, like one of the bags was torn open. There's plastic liner bags. One of those bags was torn open, so the beans were spilling out into the burlap, which is fine. A lot of coffee is just shipped in burlap, plain like that. And it's like, oh, I wonder if that's going to make a difference. And then I roast it, and something, it's pouring rain in Seattle. But it's muggy and humid, so that makes a totally different variable. And then, someone's talking to me, and I miss the temperature by 2 seconds or 10 seconds or whatever, and all that comes out, and the beans look fine, they taste great, and then you can't really notice the difference. And then you get those over to a coffee shop that then brews them on 125 psi, and 202 degrees on an espresso machine that's going to extract all those differences, and you have some barista that's hungover, and then it ends up in a cup that wasn't maybe washed fully or something. And there's so many variables that go to that fine cup of coffee at the end. It's really just, you can't possibly plan for all that. And so there's a lot of superstition that defines, it's like, it is what it is, and if you possibly try and control all that, then you're never gonna relax, and you're never gonna enjoy the coffee for what it is as an organic, an agricultural product that
I always like
varies.
to, whenever I'm drinking a cup of coffee, I always like to think about the person who sat there and nurtured the beans and created this roast, and it's, to me, it's an artistic process, like you say. You say superstition. All that stuff is just another world to me. So it's just kind of like, I imagine like Mickey Mouse in his like wizard outfit going da 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 da, and then a roast comes out.
Kind of, yeah.
So when and this is something I've been pondering, is when I'm sitting there in a cafe, and maybe this is a ridiculous question to ask, but it's a question that came to mind. How can I look at the coffee I'm drinking and, like, from what about that cup that I'm drinking is from the roaster? Like, I mean, so much of a cup comes from the person who's preparing it too.
Right. You can notice the difference, and this, my palate's gotten better as I've been roasting more and drinking a lot of coffee. That you can start to tell the difference of whether it's a roaster error or a barista error. There's different. If it tastes grainy, then it's probably a dirty portafilter from the barista. It's not roast. So there.
Well, even not just like errors, but like,
or character.
Yeah, some character.
Right. A lot of it. I mean, there's. I think a lot of what you're tasting, assuming the cup is prepared nicely, and it's if it's prepared kindly.
Brewed.
Maybe that'll be for the coffee shop.
The cafe. We can talk about that.
Kindly.
I'm interested in the cafe.
Yeah, there's some good stuff happening with that. We'll get to that.
Okay.
Roasters. It's that personality of roasters and how much they want to do. So there's definitely a theme. Traditionally coffee's been roasted dark, and we've talked about why, because of the economics and exactly, the quality of coffee. Now that farmers are getting more involved, and because of these direct trade relationships, so they're learning what the American and Northern European market really wants. Then now they're starting to cater their farming operations to grow higher quality beans to get into that, because they make so much more money. Rather than selling in the Chicago Board of Trade for $1.30 a pound, they can sell it to whatever Atlas coffee importers for $4 or $5 a pound.
Right.
And so much more money goes to the farmers, and it's better for the whole industry for people to be drinking higher quality coffee, because it improves the lives of everybody in between. So a lot of the new theme with roasters in the kind of the Northwest is it's not just the Northwest, but is to go really light and to preserve that natural beauty from the farmer that the farmer put all that care into. That's a trend. It's a trend. It's not like the whole industry is changing by any means. But you can taste that, when you get that light fruity cup. That's just like, man, that's delicious. And a lot of that is just the beans, and so they've just brought enough heat to accent those natural flavors that they want, and then they stop it, so that they're not actually putting too much of a fingerprint from the roaster on there. And I really appreciate that. I really do. It's difficult. I mean, that's a tough market to sell, because it challenges what people are used to with coffee.
Do you think this just came to mind? Do you think the roaster should be kind of invisible in the process, in the way that when someone's like drinking or enjoying the coffee? Go ahead.
Personally, no. I think that the roaster has all the right in the world to make their imprint on the coffee. I mean, it's up to the roaster to decide. Some coffees are better, some coffees aren't. Depending on how much effort you want to, how much you want to adjust that. I like calling our coffee a well-developed light roast, because I really like the natural flavors. But there's some really nice sugars and things that come out from roasting coffee. I mean, it's things that caramelize, that don't caramelize naturally with a it's not from the farm. You're actually caramelizing sugars in the roasting process, and so that's where a lot of body and things like that come from. So, for me, I don't like to put too much of an imprint on it, but in a way, I'm putting a huge imprint on it because I see that there's these sugars that I really want to accent, and that's what I'm going to do, and it's beyond just the natural bean, and we don't go too dark at all. So, to me, maybe I'm putting more of an imprint than a dark roast. It's just putting like the rest of the roaster, the physical roaster itself, putting an imprint on the beans because it's dark, versus the roaster,
right?
The human that's roasting the coffee is, So I don't know. I haven't actually thought about this little metaphor here, but
intent, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So I have a lot more intent with the coffee.
Well, and I end up getting a lot of coffee at home just in the stuff that I do. People give me coffee, or I just go buy a lot of different coffees and try them out. But when I get a bag of Conduit versus a bag of Kuma, for example, because I like buying Kuma as well. If I was blindfolded, I wouldn't be able to tell. Maybe I'm taking a leap here, but I could smell a bag of Conduit and just be like, "That's Conduit coffee." I don't know why that is, but I can tell it's very distinct.
Right.
Obviously, I mean, different beans roasted different ways.
Right, and Mark, Kuma coffee is wonderful coffee. He's kind of a hero of mine as far as, especially like, he does well-developed light roasts, but they're really light. And I don't know what he does. I mean, it's a different roaster, so he's not doing infrared heat. He's doing, it's direct heat. I'm kind of enamored with his coffee a lot of times because it's beautiful coffee. It's really light. The thing with real light coffee versus anything darker is that it takes longer for those gases to degas. There's not quite as many of them. It hasn't been developed enough to release those in the roasting process. So that's why when you get the real dark stuff, or you walk by the aisle in the grocery store, it's like, yeah, that's some pungent coffee, And so those are those aromatics that come out from just roasting. It just allows them to escape quicker. So a lot of times, I recommend letting our coffee sit. I think the Bolivian's great after like 2 weeks. I think it just gets time to sort of settle down and relax, and the CO2 is basically out of it. And
I definitely noticed a difference. I came in last week or the week before, and I got a bag of Bolivia the day after you roasted it, and it had a very amazing aroma to it. But it changed.
Right,
still amazing, but different.
Yeah, and that's what's fascinating. Actually, this Hawaiian coffee was some of the most amazing education in that regard. It was like bright papaya when I first roasted it. Within 4 days, it was like this nice fruity papaya, and then a week later, it was like it went off a cliff and it hit this like chocolatey, smooth, full body, and I was like, wow, there is virtually no papaya fruitiness in that at all. It all degassed out of it, and maybe it's more of the aromatics that I'm actually tasting in my nose. So those have escaped, but. Yeah, it's fascinating how that stuff changes, and that's the learning process, and that's the style of the coffee shops. I was talking to a roaster. He doesn't roast anymore, but he comes here once in a while and gives me pointers. But he was fed up with clients because one client wanted 17 days out, and they wanted him to roast every day and then hold the coffee for 17 days, and then deliver it to him. And he basically had to cut the difference. Like, we're going to hold it for 8 days, and you're going to take it and hold it, because they didn't have room. I mean, it was, a couple 100 pounds a week. Wow. It's a lot of coffee to be sitting on the shelf for 17 days, and just letting, and so some people get really particular. And when you're dealing with espresso, with those tremendous, the pressures and everything that can bring that out. And so it's really good to let the coffee age a little bit before you put it through espresso. So, you're getting the full coffee, not the gases and the crema.
Speaking of espresso, we haven't talked about your Loco Focos.
I want to say, our award.
Yes. Please talk about
Loco Focos. It's a silly name, and people often don't want to say, so I just want to explain real quick. Everybody, please just look it up. Just type in Loco Focos, LOCOFOCOS. On Wikipedia, you'll see the first line is, it's a radical wing of the Democratic Party in the 1800s. And I came across that term in graduate school, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to name my espresso blend that. And that was in 2007. because it's these people that were challenging the big money, the Tammany Hall Democrats, and they were challenging the gas companies, and they were pro-labor and pro-union and pro-craftsman, and they were getting bullied around in New York City. Mm-hmm. And so when they shut off the gas light during their protests, they would use candles. And in the derogatory pseudo-Spanish, they got named the crazy lights, the Loco Focos. And that's like the founding of the Forest Service, and all that stuff came out of the Loco Focos movement in like the 1840s, I guess. So that's why it's kind of a radical blend and sort of radical idea that goes into this. So just for the record, Loco Focos is an awesome concept.
I like that.
It's a silly name for espresso. I'm thinking about coming up with another blend just so I can have an easier name, like the Westlake Avenue blend or something like that. So the award was really fun. The competition I really enjoyed it. There was a lot of criticism,
and this was the America's Best Espresso competition?
Yeah, at Coffee Fest.
Coffee Fest last year, 2012.
Yeah. They had a call out to roasters that wanted to be a part of that, and so we signed up, and then we did our little spiel, and we got into the 32 that they picked from the Western region. It's not America, but there's in Canada too, which is funny. I mean, there's a lot of funny things about the competition that they could plan out better. But what was really cool was it was a tournament style bracket system, and there weren't points associated with it. So it wasn't like the judges tasted all the coffees and then the winner with the highest points for the espresso won. It was totally informal, where it's just head to head. Your shots are better, your shots are better. And you just move through the bracket system like a tournament. Which is silly in the coffee world. It's kind of like it doesn't like there's no real bragging rights in there. So there's nothing to lose.
What does better mean anyway?
Right, exactly. And you're looking at the judges' notes, and I think that people can tell what might be better than the other. And these were professional judges. It's not like people off the street that don't know anything about coffee. But because there's no points, and because it's a bracket system, and you might be a roaster over there, and I'm a roaster over here, and you got bumped out by whatever Olympia, and they move forward. It's like, it doesn't mean that my coffee was better than yours. It just, so there wasn't anything to lose by joining this thing. It was just like, how many times people are going to say our name over a microphone? At least twice. And then it turned out that we had pretty darn good espresso, and we went all the way through and got second place. And what I liked about it too was the top three, even the top four, were no-name roasters. I mean, the fourth place was out of Tri-Cities. Roasters out of Tri-Cities, and then third place was Bowen Island Roasting from BC, from Canada, from little Gulf Islands up there. This little mom and pop shop. And then us, we got second place. Conduit, who the hell are they? And then first place was Blue Star Coffee out of Twisp. And so none of the bigs made it in. Vita got knocked out right away. Umbre got knocked out right away. And all these big names that get kind of hoity-toity about their coffee in the industry and get really finicky, and they didn't get through it. And so, it was definitely, the whole tournament itself made a lot of these people mad because they didn't win and they weren't recognized in it, and they think they have great coffee, and they do. A lot of them do, but it really highlighted just the community aspect of it, and the whole scene at Coffee Fest was really fun. Everybody's cheering and hugging, and it was great. It was so fun, and never did I think that we were actually going to do as well as we did. It was pretty shocking, and it was made a lot busier of a weekend because we were in it for so long. We had to rearrange all of our schedules to be there.
Totally. I was actually, I was there. I don't remember. I wasn't paying attention to the competitions as much, but it was. I remember it being pretty wild. Did they just taste the espresso straight?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And there's a time limit. So my friend Cole McBride went and pulled shots, and it was 3 judges, so they each get a shot of espresso. And the first round, when there was a lot of roasters going, they had 6 minutes to get in there and do what you needed to do and pull the shots. And then the second days we had, I think it was 10 minutes, which was totally leisurely. It was really funny. Cole was there, and he's like, you'd pull a shot and smell it and taste it and lick it and throw it away and pull another one. He used I think it was over 20 cups in 10 minutes, like 20 single shots of espresso.
Wow.
10 pulls. And he'd taste one and be like, oh, that's a good one. So you take that one cup out to the judge and hand it to one judge. Then you go pull another one and do the same process over and over and over, because he's just a stellar barista that he's so smooth and was absolutely meticulous with that. That's probably mostly why we went back to that superstition. You know, it wasn't actually our espresso. It was just that we had this awesome character pulling our shots for us.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah, it was great.
I remember listening to you just talking about espresso and talking about, because I think your local focus has gone through some changes since then. But listening to you talk about balancing the bright flavors and the ability to also work well with milk, which is not something I ever think about.
Right, but that's a good espresso blend is the bread and butter of a coffee roaster and wholesale company. I mean, that's what sells volumes. You know, you can love all your single origins and light coffees as much as you want, but how many are you going to sell? Mm-hmm. You know, you rarely are going to find accounts that are buying 40 pounds of an organic Bolivian coffee a week. You know, I mean, that's just, it doesn't really happen. I mean, shops aren't that big and the industry isn't there yet. There's certainly a few, and it's moving in that direction. But an espresso blend that works well with milk, that has enough body to carry through on a latte, that's key. I mean, you have to have that. So I like to think in terms of profiles. I mean, coffee is an agricultural product, and we're a small roasting operation with limited money. So we cannot possibly buy all the coffee and keep the blend consistent. Mm-hmm. Plus, it's really boring. You know, I mean, what's fun about having a blend that's always the same, you know, and doesn't have the ability to change with the industry. So I like to think in terms of profiles where, you know, we have our darker Northern Italian style profile, and then I have this kind of lighter thing, I call it the Cloud Woman Project, that's just playful. It's just my own blending fun time. And then there's our Loco Focos Espresso that it's actually two different roasts that I blend back together. And so there's a lighter portion, there's a darker portion, and I use a natural process Brazil. You know, I basically got the recipe from Sweet Maria's when I was starting up. This is kind of a standard espresso blend, and then I went from there with the coffees I had and what was available, and tasted a lot, of course. So we have this profile where we have our lighter portion that's definitely on the really well developed light roast side, but that gives that nice acidic nuttiness to it, and I don't have a particularly bright coffee in that roll, so it's not going to be super fruity. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't want to surprise people too much when they're, because I'm trying to sell a lot of coffee to the masses, so you don't want to challenge people too much. Mm-hmm. But having that lighter portion that gives a lot of sort of vibrant character in an Americano or a single shot of espresso, and then we have a darker portion that's brought up it's really 45 seconds away from second crack. So the beans are just starting to show a tiny little bit of oil, and that's where I tend to use. I have really nice El Salvador Bourbon, 100% Bourbon, that's super sweet and has this wonderful body, and that's where we go with the darker portion, and so that gives a little bit of fruitiness to it, but that acid's definitely toned down with that kind of roast, and then I blend it all back together, so you get this nice mixture of the two. All in all, they're not too far apart. You don't want to have the inconsistencies between shots of espresso you're pulling, to have too light and too dark, but it's just enough to kind of accent that. So I think in terms of profile. So yes, our espresso changes just because the coffee changes and our winds change, but pretty much guaranteed all of our clients that the espresso profile is going to be essentially the same. We're going to have a lighter portion, we're going to have a darker portion. We're going to bring it to the height of the sweetness that we find in that lighter realm, and the height of the body, and a little bit of the sweetness in the darker realm, and then we put it back together, and trust us, it's going to be fine. It's going to change. And so it's very hands-on. I mean, I definitely, when we're experimenting with a new blend, I hand out a lot of samples of it, especially to the cafes, and get their feedback and see if they're interested in it. We had a really nice Ethiopian that was super fruity. It was like a walk in a blueberry field, and that was the version after the competition. And then people liked it, but it surprised a lot of people. And so when the Ethiopian ran out, I replaced it with this current Rwandan, which is much more savory. It's like a kind of a meaty protein sort of taste in the Rwandan by itself, and it adds a really nice kind of standard espresso body to the whole thing. And since then, I mean, people loved it. So definitely, one of those learning things is okay, so I'm probably not going to put a nice, bright, fruity coffee in the Loco Focos Espresso. Save that for something else, and
I feel like we could talk forever about all this stuff. Perhaps, shall we wrap up with what is your most favorite coffee that you've roasted thus far?
Ever? Or with Conduit?
With Conduit.
With Conduit. As far as big bags of coffee go, and then kind of real scale, I love this Bolivian. Mm-hmm. And the learning process and the quality of the coffee, and I mean, even the bags. I wish the listeners could see it, but the bags are just these vibrant, colorful bags.
I'll come back and take some pictures. I'll get some pictures.
Yeah,
We'll throw them.
And if you look online too, we have a picture of the bags next to our beans. But yeah, the Bolivian's beautiful. We're such a small roaster. I can do bags of coffee from Sweet Maria's as well, doing the home roaster stuff. So I've had a few absolutely remarkable coffees, including a Kenyan I have right now. You had some of that as an espresso a couple weeks ago. Or maybe you're out of town. You might have been gone.
I might have been out of town. There was one that you had. There's one that I don't even remember what it was. Right before I left, you had a box of something roasted that I got a bag of. I can't remember what it was.
Oh, but it wouldn't be the Kenyan.
I don't think it was Kenyan, but it was absolutely remarkable. Anyway,
wish I could remember.
I wish I could remember.
Yeah, that's the fun part about this. Is it changes all the time.
Yeah,
it's really fun.
It's a journey.
So there's some beautiful coffees, and as we're growing, we have more money and we're figuring out our routines more, and the roaster's getting broken, and I think all of our coffees are improving greatly.
All right. So this has been Jesse, Conduit Coffee. It's been fun.
It's been really fun. I love this.
Yes.
Really appreciate it, Joseph. It's you can find us at conduitcoffee.com. We're at several cafes. They're listed on our website. Definitely in the Fremont, Ballard area and downtown. And our studio is open on Tuesdays.
And for those of you listening to the end of this, go to the next page and you'll see a nice deal made specifically for you coffee lovers in this magazine.
Yeah.
You can buy some Conduit. I'm not sure what the discount will be as we're recording this, but you'll see it on the next page.
Let's think of something quick.
It'll be a good deal. Get some of it. Get some of the Bolivian. It's on there, right?
It is, yeah. We have like 75 pounds of it left. So.
Awesome. Get the Bolivian before it's gone. It's delicious.
Please. And we have some new single origins coming in July. It's going to be wonderful.
All right. Thank you for listening, and have a good day.
Cheers.